We believe she transmitted until the plane was carried away. She apparently died as a casualty. Well, it says the bones in other artifacts. When things go wrong, they go wrong. After the war, the Brits go back to the island. They find a very bizarre, to them, water collection device. And they asked the natives, who taught you how to make this? Who came back to repopulate? And the natives said, that's not how we collect water. And they showed them. This apparently was a metallic box with what looked like louvers in it with cloth on it, which was deteriorated to collect water. Well, it sort of looks like an engine intake, is the way it's described. So they go searching. They find bones in the sand, not a complete skeleton, but about an 80% complete skeleton. On the island are coconut crabs, and they are huge. And they're this local scavenger. So anything that dies there, the coconut crabs tear apart, and they're actually big enough to take parts of small animals into their holes in the ground. And that's where some of the bones from the skeleton probably went. So they collect it, and they send it to a lab in Fiji. The doctor there is not a forensic anthropologist. He's not a pathologist. He looks at the bones and says, well, based on my examination, it's a small male, and I can't tell you if it's native or Caucasian. But he does take measurements. When the research group goes looking for Amelia, they find this report. So they say, oh, well, can we see the bones? Well, they were moved to a central lab. Okay, can we see the bones? We'd like to show them to you. Why can't you show them to them? We've misplaced them. We know they're in a warehouse, but we don't know where. And that's the status of the bones today. But we do have these measurements. So the measurements that the physician took in the late 40s were sent to the body farm in Tennessee. And the forensic anthropologists there look at the data, punch it into the computer to compare it to databases, and come back with, our analysis is, it's a Caucasian female, late 30s, 40s, probably Amelia. When they go back to where the camp was found, where the Colorado saw it, they found glassware, they found animals that people would have been eating. There's evidence of cooking. They also found a bottle that, when they examine it, is for Freckle Cream. And it's the same brand that Amelia Earhart endorsed and might have taken with her. They also found a piece of aluminum from an aircraft. Unfortunately, it doesn't fit any known part of an Electra 10E, except for the fact that they had a window patched over with sheet aluminum. And the rivet pattern seems to match a rivet pattern in a photo on the patch. If that's truly it, and there's about an 80 to 90% confidence level, we do have part of the Electra. And that's the story. Now, if you want more detail than I could ever give you about the radios, about the antennas, this group here, TIGAR, the International Group for Historic Aircraft Recovery, has pages and pages of original documents and drawings. And I also use this Wings Over Kansas for the interview with Bellarts, who was the radioman. If you've got questions, please unmute and I'll do my best to answer them. I hope you've sort of enjoyed this little foray into a historical accident that maybe with a little pre-planning and a little coordination didn't have to happen. Oh, and by the way, I forgot to tell you guys, when the Itasca realized she wasn't answering them, they sent a continuous series of dashes for her to home in on. They were not heard either. Okay.
Excellent.
Let me
Excellent.
stop sharing here. Were there many modifications? Yes, mostly in the fuel intake and monitoring system, and a few tweaks to shapes on the wings and tail, and that was Kelly Johnson. Anything else? Fred is asking Jimmy Stewart.
I think they're looking for the answer to your trivia question.
Oh, the trivia question. Oh, okay. I guess I better give you that. No, it's not Greta Garbo. The answer to the trivia question is the actor who played Friar Tuck in Robin Hood, Eugene Pallette was his name. And I have no idea why the two of them became close friends, but some of Noonan's last letters from New Guinea were not to his wife, but to Eugene Pallette.
I think that would have been everybody's second choice, John.
Yeah, I know. That's why I threw it in there. Yeah, I'm sort of fascinated with the radio aspect to it. You know, you got a transmitter for CW, you got the Coast Guard using CW, and you got two people on board who don't understand what to do or even how to use a key.
Yeah, nice confluence of bad news for the both of them. John, last specific about New York.
Oh, New York. Yes, I didn't tell you that. Thank you, Tom. That ties the story up and sort of proves she was on Gardner Island. She lands there in 1937. Sometime in the early 1930s, a tramp steamer by the name of Norwich City grounded on the atoll of Gardner Island. And the wreck was in sight of where Earhart, we believe, crash lands. And it's more than likely she would have gone there to see if she could salvage anything. So could Betty have not heard Norwich City, but New York City? A little QRM? It's a busted call. We've all had them. So I did not put Tom up to that. He did that all on his own, and I thank you because it did slip my mind. But Norwich City is the wreck there, and that wreck was on the island until the 50s when it finally slipped away. But if she was, in fact, saying Norwich City, she was on that island, and that's where she died. But this was a perfect storm. If it could go wrong, it did go wrong.
John, we have a comment here.
Yes.
Maybe you can elaborate on. Our participant says, I have no mic or video capability. Is it not true that her radio skills were poor at best and that she had no real skill with CW? I have seen elsewhere that she left behind her CW key to save weight. There's also seemed to be a debate about her long wire trailing antenna, which A, may have been removed, or B, might have been broken.
Okay, I can comment on that. We don't know if she had a key on board. I don't know. It would have been in the cockpit, and there would have been one in the back. She had very poor radio skills. Her idea of radio communication was to push the button and speak into the mic. And she knew enough to turn the directional antenna to the strongest beam and fly that way. But that's about the extent of her radio skills. Noonan had no radio skills. As a navigator for Pan Am, he wasn't required to have a radioman's license. He was a navigator. The Pan Am flying boats were luxurious enough. They had dedicated radiomen on them. The pilots also knew radio. All he had to do was sit there and dead reckon navigate. He was excellent at celestial navigation, general navigation skills. He was an excellent navigator. She didn't always trust him, as we saw over Africa. And yes, you're right. The DX finding equipment was put on, but she didn't have much skill with it, so it was removed to save weight. The trailing antenna weighed about 50 pounds. You had to put a loading coil on it, and that had to be changed out if you changed frequency. Noonan was not good at it. We don't know who wound the coil that they used, and that may be why it didn't work when she was flying from Burbank to Florida. In Miami, she specifically took that antenna off and discarded it. It was too heavy. There's the thought that the one 500 kilocycle receiving antenna broke off at Leh. In the 1940s, when they talked to people there, one of the locals who said, I saw her take off, pulls out a piece of copper wire and says, this came off her plane. There's no way to know if that did it at all. The luggage company she licensed, they did some licensing, and her family licensed it. So she was a bit of an entrepreneur. She didn't understand transmit, receive, and direction finding. That was not something that she was good at. She would have been told, do this, do that, maybe have had a checklist. She couldn't hear. Everything that I've read says that she's transmitting blind, and they're sending dashes to her. They're sending on all her frequencies, and she is hearing squat. Yes, Coop, you're absolutely right. There is a picture with what looks like a trailing antenna. That was taken before she went on the round the world flight. That was for publicity to build up interest in the flight. As a pilot, she was a competent pilot. She was multi-engine rated. The aircraft was an excellent aircraft. It served well into the 40s in various iterations for the military. The aircraft was not the problem. The problem was Harry Manning, who was her original navigator, bowed out. He had other commitments. He would have been able to understand and transmit on Morse. Without that, no. And no, I have not heard Rod Bloxham, but I will certainly look into it. It's a tragic story. Like so many of these things, we look back and we say, what if? Well, the only hero here, and if they'd believed her, was that little girl in St. Petersburg, Florida. People didn't want to believe her when she told her story that she heard Amelia Earhart. They thought it was just a 15-year-old girl making stories up, and that she couldn't possibly have heard Amelia Earhart from the South Pacific. That's what I got.
John, I got a question.
Sure.
My mother I always remember my mother telling me a story that at that time she was a Girl Scout and she was studying Morse code, and she thought that she heard an SOS from Amelia Earhart. She was a shortwave listener. She had one of those, like Zenith things like the girl down in Florida had. But you're telling me that nobody knew Morse code, and
no, I'm saying Amelia
did the Morse code.
I'm saying Amelia did.
Right, but you said the navigator didn't know it either. Right?
He didn't know it either.
Yeah,
no,
the navigator didn't know it. Right. So
yeah.
So basically, she probably didn't hear it. But that was always the story she was telling.
No, it's possible. When they've looked at reports in newspapers, there are something like 148 people claiming at that time to have heard Amelia. And most of them are saying they heard her on voice. Now, the ones that heard CW, like the guys in San Francisco, were clearly lying because she wasn't sending Morse.
Well, this would have been out of New Jersey, Ridgewood, New Jersey.
I suppose it's possible. Ed tells me here that that it was a good year for sunspots. So it's altogether possible. And the 500 kilocycles was also an emergency freak. So yeah, she was a seat of the pants flyer, crashed a couple of times. I'm fortunate that somewhere in my archives, I've got a piece of fabric from the Electra that she used to fly the Atlantic as the first female pilot. Many years ago, during efforts to restore aircraft at the Smithsonian, they had extra pieces of fabric that were damaged, and you could buy them. So I have 3 pieces of fabric, one from the Electra that Amelia flew across the Atlantic, one from something called the Vinfiz Flyer, which was an early aircraft that crashed its way across the United States, literally. It must have crashed about 20 times. And I have a piece of fabric from a DH-4 that was the first round-the-world plane from the United States flown by Navy Flyer. So, yeah, I've had an aviation bug for a while. How did I get interested? The same way I got interested in the other 2 topics. My mother. When I was a kid, around 7, my mother lived in Nyack, New York, up the river. So we would go up to occasionally visit friends there. And we would go up Storm King Highway, and we would go through Teaneck and that area. And the road took us past where the Dwight Morrow School is. Not Teaneck, Englewood. And my mother pointed out that that was the Lindbergh residence. And that's where Lindbergh lived. And he had left there, and the baby was kidnapped in Hopewell in March 32. So I knew about the Lindbergh kidnapping. And she tells me that when Lindbergh flew the Atlantic in 27, she was 6 years old, and she remembered going downstairs to her grandmother, because she and her parents lived upstairs, and listened on a crystal radio to the broadcast of Lindbergh taking off, and 33 hours later, the radio broadcast of him landing in Paris. So that got me started on Lindbergh, Lady Lindbergh planes. And at the same time, she says, and, you know, Grandma was older than normal grandmas because her father was 40 when he got married. And so she said, you never met Grandma Lee Craft. But Grandma Lee Craft saw Abraham Lincoln lying in state after he was shot when he came to New York City on the way back to Springfield for burial. So you tell a 7-year-old kid about a kidnapped baby, murder, arrests, trials, and a dead president, you got a kid hooked on that sort of thing for life. And that's how I got interested in it. And I've just sort of stayed with it. I will contact Rod. I definitely have to do it. Any other questions? That's it. So I guess I'll turn it back to you, Nomar.
Question. Betty, all right, and her information. How long was it from when it was, quote, noticed, and how long was it from that time of it being noticed that it was actually publicized?
At the time, she tells her father, and her father reports that they may have heard it. No one believes it. Years, about 2001, she hears that Tegar is starting to do the first expedition to go look for Amelia Earhart. And she says, I think I heard Amelia Earhart when she crashed. And I have a notebook. So they went down, and for many years they wouldn't give her name out. And they saw the notebook. They got permission from her to copy it, and it's now in their archives. So we're talking, 80 years afterwards, they publicized that she did it, and she probably really did hear Amelia. A little late.
A little bit late, but absolutely outstanding.
Yeah, it's a great story. It's a great story. These are the type of stories I like. So I will make sure that if we go into the technical details, my Elmer has the details, and he can explain it far better than I can. And to protect me and my ignorance, I'm not going to reveal who's been the one who's been mentoring. I don't want him to feel bad that I didn't get everything.
Okay, John, thank you very much for an awesome presentation. I always like to hear you speak. I had the opportunity last year to join you in one of your other passionate topics, which is John Wilkes Booth, Lincoln assassination, and that was a great presentation. To all our visitors, thank you very much. To everybody that participated, we had close to 45 people join us tonight, which is great. One of our nets is called From Near and From Far, some visitors from other parts of the country, and we thank you all at the beginning with Ed. If you want more information on the club, if you want to get in our newsletter mailing list, send Ed a note. WX2R@ARRL.net. Continue to be a part of the Fairlawn Amateur Radio Club. Ed, is it October 23rd or October 30th?
Yeah, actually both. You're right.
Well, we will have presentations. One of them from a good friend of the club. He is also a broadcaster, and he's going to talk about his experiences in monitoring and radio listening and radio behavior while he was working for a radio station in Alaska. Write to Ed, WX2R at ARRL.net. You can put their FLARC newsletter so he knows what's it about, and he'll get you in the list. So to everyone, again, thank you very much. We'll be shutting down, and we hope to have you in our future presentations. So on behalf of the Fairlawn Amateur Radio Club, have a great weekend. Enjoy it, please, everybody. Stay safe, stay healthy. So good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.
John, excellent.